why is answering the question, who am I, to trying to get a feeling of one's true self, obviously such a tall order?
People have a sense of who they are, and in an unreflective way, there doesn't seem to need any examination. But when you begin to look at it and you begin to examine it, that's when you find that actually it's much more complicated than that. So I think it's that the complication is partly because, on the one hand, there's a very strong intuitive sense that the identity is constant and concrete, if you like. But in lived experience, we find it's not like that at all. It's constantly evolving, constantly changing. So then you want to kind of like pin it down, but it won't be pinned down. And I think that's the complexity. One reason why identity is complicated is actually multifaceted. So there are some elements of your identity which do remain pretty much continuous across your whole life. Other aspects of identity are much more context dependent. So an obvious one would be when someone becomes a parent. They are given this new identity of a father or a mother, and it completely transforms how they feel, how they are viewed, and how they behave.
I've just come from a guy who basically said, look, you've made me chief executive. I hope you don't suddenly expect me to be a rah-rah leader getting everybody going from the front of the room. I'm an analytical, I'm a reflective intellectual leader, and you take it or leave it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example, really, because in a situation like that, the dilemma is always trying to work out what is kind of non-negotiable for you, what you can't do, and what you might be able to do, and to neither be kind of constrained too much by what you have been to date, but to have realistic expectations of what you can be.
How to strike a balance there between what you should wish for in terms of growing personally, developing your potential, embracing fluidity and of identity and change, and on the other hand, staying true to yourself.
It's very difficult. Now, true to yourself, I mean, this is a phrase I think we need to really unpick quite a bit. I think there are elements which are fairly immutable, I think, around personality. I think personality is something which doesn't really seem to change much over life. A little bit, maybe. But even then, if you, for example, you could think of someone who's quite shy, who becomes more outgoing. Usually that doesn't mean their fundamental personality is changing. They're usually, perhaps introspective by nature, but they learn to become more comfortable in social situations, and so as a result are able to be a bit more outgoing. Values is another thing as well. I think that's an important aspect of identity. Most of us have a set of values which sort of govern how we want to live and how we want to be with other people. And again, these are going to evolve because you're learning all the time, and no one has all their values sorted age 20 and that's the end of the story. But again, these go rather slowly. So in terms of what really can change, I think it's more to do with what you can actually do behaviourally in terms of action, which is compatible with those other aspects of the self which are going to remain the same. And I think that's where people often surprise themselves.
What I was wondering was whether one is a better leader the more one understands the identity of the team.
Right.
Have you got any insights on the extent to which, or the way in which a leader should uncover the identity of those in his or her team, and how perhaps they should balance them to make it all hum nicely?
You can see how groups behave much, much more like individuals than we often give them credit for. And I think identity is therefore a very relevant concept to bring to that. So what you need to know, again, as a member of a group, is not just what your role in it is, but what that group is, what the identity of the group is, what you're working towards, how you're working towards it, ethos, values, and so forth. And, when that happens, people, what are the cliched phrases? Everyone's moving in the same direction, reading from the same sheet. That's true. That's because there is a clear enough sense of identity. And then, as if to sort of demonstrate the fact that these things are always a matter about careful balance and it's easy for tip over, a lot of the time organisations go wrong because they settle into an identity too much, so it becomes ossified, so it loses its fluidity.
And you get groupthink.
Yeah, groupthink, and people take it for granted. They go, this is what we do, this is what we've always done, and around them the world is changing and it collapses.
I was reading around this subject and I found a Mark Twain quote.
Oh, yeah.
Now, he's always
good for a quote.
quite a wise fellow. And he said, people are like the moon. There's always a dark side that nobody ever sees.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it has to be. I mean, on the view I defend, we are the sum total of all our facets, and that includes the good and the bad. And I think it's very important to acknowledge them. If you recognise the fact that you're human, you're like anybody else, and you are potentially corruptible, that makes you stronger, so you're able to kind of recognise where temptation arises and take steps to just avoid getting into that situation in the first place. So yeah, you've got to acknowledge your bad side.
We, colleagues and friends, we sometimes talk about the deathbed test.
Okay.
When you're on your deathbed and you're reflecting on your life, and usually it's about work-life balance. My question is, to what extent can getting clarity over one's identity mean you will pass the deathbed test?
So when people talk about deathbed regrets, it's about I didn't do that, or I failed to do that, or I made that mistake. But I wonder really whether that's entirely the right question to ask, and whether or not a better question is, deathbed question is, have I been the kind of person I wanted to be?